I am Anna Seawold, and this is Authentic Parenting, a podcast about growing ourselves while raising our children. I'm a psychologist, educator, and parent coach, and on this podcast, I explore how you can connect to your authentic self, practice radical self-care, and raise emotionally healthy children. Let's break the cycle of generational trauma for a more peaceful, kind, and compassionate world. Today, inner work for fathers. Young men, especially men of color, want to be good dads, but it takes more than a strong will to make that desire a reality. I'm speaking with Charles Daniels. He's a therapist and the co-founder and CEO of Fathers UpLift, an organization that helps fathers reconnect with their children. It's a nonprofit organization that provides mental health counseling, coaching, and advocacy to assist fathers with overcoming barriers that prevent them from remaining engaged in their children's lives. He is also the author of a newly published book called Present: The Crisis of American Fatherhood and the Power of Showing Up. Present is an honest look at the complexities that accompany separation and the sometimes grueling effort it takes to overcome those barriers. Daniels describes what it takes for fathers to parent themselves, for families to practice forgiveness, and for fathers and communities to create support structures so that dads can navigate life transitions, relate better to the whole family, and heal from their own woundedness. I really enjoyed connecting with Charles. I enjoyed this conversation very much. And as someone who works with fathers, advocates for dads, I think it's an important one. In this conversation, you will hear the poignant memory of waiting for his father's blue pickup truck and how the visit suddenly stopped at age 10, an experience that shaped his emotional world and mental health. A vulnerable look at the shame and silence that kept his father away, not a lack of love, but societal and personal barriers tied to having two families. How inner child work empowers fathers to meet their unmet emotional needs and become more present and emotionally attuned caregivers. The mission and methods of Fathers UpLift, and a fresh, humanizing take on modern fatherhood, where connection, emotional presence, and shared caregiving define strength. We also talked about the essential role of supplemental fathers and community figures, and that healing is possible, and that being a great father isn't about being perfect. It's about showing up again and again. Please enjoy, and thank you for listening. Well, Charles, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me. Glad to be here.
I'm so excited to talk about this topic. It's so important, and I really loved your book. I finished it today, just in time for this interview. But I want to start our conversation with the first sentence of your book. I think it's so powerful. No young man wants to grow up to be an absent father.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me more about this.
Yeah, I think about the fact that we were all children, and that, every father that we know today was a child. And typically I think about the question that that child will get one day: what do you want to be when you grow up? And I know the answer isn't an absent dad. So really just keeping into our awareness that that father was once a child helps me in my own life, but also helps me in my work to show more compassion and more gratitude.
Yeah, love the compassion angle for sure. And of course, absent fathers, that there's so many reasons for that, right? And no one story is the same. So I want to ask you, about your own childhood. What's your story? Because I know you had told yourself something else about your father, why he was absent. Take it, take me from wherever you want to go, but maybe what's your earliest memory of like wanting to have a father? Like, when did you become aware that you didn't have one?
Yeah, for me, when I was a kid, say between the ages of 6 and 10. 10 was when my father left for good. But between those ages, my father would pull up to my apartment where I lived with my mother, in his blue pickup truck, and I would stand by the window and wait for him to get there. So he would come and we would play, and he'd spend time with my mom, and those visits would happen at least 2 or 3 times a year. So as a child, I was always looking forward to those visits. And then when I was a 10, one visit occurred, and then I didn't see him again, and that's when I knew something's going on. Dad is no longer coming in his blue pickup truck to see me. So you can imagine, trying to figure out why. As a curious kid, I was very curious as a child. It became a part of my DNA and how I navigated my childhood. And then as I got older, I realized that dad wasn't coming back. And then I would say in my mid 20s, I had a significant moment of suicidal ideation. And then what I realized at that moment was that much of my concerns and the search for where his whereabouts contributed to my mental health, my depression, my low self-esteem, my lack thereof of worth. And I wanted to do something about it. So my wife, Samantha, helped me find why my father had been absent from my life. And what we found was that dad had been living with his wife 3 hours away from where my mother and I lived. My mother was the outside woman, and dad was navigating the
Mm.
stresses connected to rearing two families. He didn't know how to do it, but also there was shame connected to having a child outside of his marriage that he didn't know how to navigate. For him, that was his barrier. And that same shame is still the shame that keeps us separate today. Nonetheless, that's one specific subset of emotional barriers that keeps men disengaged from their kids' lives. So my work in general is like a love letter to my father and fathers like him to say, hey, you know what? I know that you never dreamed of being separate from your child's life, but guess what? There's always hope as long as your child is alive and as long as you are alive. And that's the mission, that's the ministry that we partake in. And to be honest with you, as I continue to do the work, we see a whole bunch of barriers that prevent fathers from being engaged in their kids' lives, such as substance use, homelessness, child welfare department related decisions where fathers are forced out of their kids' life, even incarceration. And if you want to go a little bit further, the opiate epidemic, when you look at how many fathers and grandfathers that the disease have took away from families due to overdose, and especially overdose due to fentanyl. And now, even today, under the Trump administration, mass deportation. We know there's going to be a lot of parents separated from their children given the massive rage that's occurring. So there's a lot of reasons why fathers, parents in general, are disengaged, and we're here to help them stay engaged in their kids' life. So.
And do you find that, men who grew up fatherless buy into this idea of hope, or do they show resistance because of their hurt, of their history, right? Like you're in a different place. It seems like you have understanding, compassion, and forgiveness, and you want to build a relationship even though he was absent. Is that the case for other men? Like, what do they have to go to get there?
Not initially. Healing is a journey for a lot of men, and forgiveness of self and others is a journey for all of us.
Mm.
And typically, the hard part is letting them know that hope and healing is possible, and that even though your child may express one emotion that suggests they don't want you around, that's really not the case. So, how do you get past your own decisions and what someone else did to really focus on what you want, which is typically a relationship with their children? I would say that most men we serve want to be in their kids' lives even though the circumstances suggest otherwise. And that varies, from unhealthy relationships with their children to some of the ones that I mentioned earlier. But based on the level and the nature of the hurt, that would be in alignment with how difficult it is to get the father to see the hope. So if the level of hurt is pretty intense, to break through that cycle, to let them know that hope is available, will be equally intense. And I guess that's just the journey of pain and how it cycles and how it's tough for many people. But that's what we're seeing day to day when we work with these dads. It's not always easy at first. It's never easy, actually.
Yeah, well, why don't you tell us a little bit about the organization that you formed?
Yeah. Yeah. So, this generous act of love for my father and for many fathers like him is a nonprofit organization that's geared towards reconnecting fathers to their children and helping any father overcome any barrier that prevents him from being disengaged from his kid's life. And we do that through various ways from therapy, ensuring that we can tend to their inner child that I talk a lot about in my book. And then you have coaching and case management to support dads deal with some of those external issues, such as finding housing, finding employment, advocacy to deal with your legal situation so you can stay connected to
Mm.
your kids. So the goal for us at Fathers UpLift is to create a holistic source of support and a network to keep fathers engaged in their kids' lives despite the circumstances that led to them being disengaged.
Mm. And is your background inspired you to become a therapist?
You know what? I tell people all the time, therapy chose me. That's not what I wanted to do initially. You may not know this, Anna, but I wanted to be an attorney. But I could not score high enough on the LSAT. So I ended up going to social work school. It's the only school that accepted me. And I'm so happy I did. And I'm so happy therapy called me because I can't see myself as a lawyer today because I genuinely love what I do.
Yeah, I mean, if you have that type of compassion, I think
Yeah,
it would be hard to litigate.
yeah.
And yeah, this is more important work that you're doing, you know? It's really important. I think you talk about that people ask you, what is a good fatherhood? Let's talk about that. Fatherhood looks different today than it did when you grew up or, our grandfathers. Like, let's talk about today's fathers, like what it means to be a good father. Is it, being a provider and protector? Like, what goes into that?
Yeah, if you were to ask my father what makes him a good father, he would tell you, I bought my son school clothes. So I did what I need to do as a father, right? And he'll be very unapologetic about it. If you ask fathers today, it's a little bit different. We see more fathers, there's more stay-at-home fathers, there's more fathers leading single-parent households, there's more fathers engaged in household chores. There's more fathers that celebrate being fathers and really enjoy just being around their children and speaking to them. So we see that there's a difference completely. And I think it's connected to how we look at masculinity and how we see ourselves as men. I think today's men are a little bit more affectionate. They're a little bit more open to saying, you know what? I'm going to be the father that I choose to be. I'm not going to be this hard, cold, stern father that only cares about providing and buying. I really care about emotionally showing up and being the best person I can be. So, fathers today is all about the relationship, nurturing those relationships, having fun with your children, contributing to household tasks, and supporting the mothers in our lives. It's different today, and I think justifiably so.
Mm. I mean, did you have any siblings growing up, and where did you grow up?
Yeah, I grew up in Riverdale, Georgia, outside of Atlanta. I'm born in Atlanta in Piedmont Hospital. And I did have siblings. I had two siblings that are 17 years older than me on my mom's side. And then I have, I would say, four siblings on my father's side who
Mm.
two of which who lived in the household with my father and his wife. So they saw a version of dad that we didn't know. And there's a version of dad that's present. I think I want to kind of definitely say this because it's very important. You know, as fathers, our kids get different parts of ourselves. You know, the version of the dad that I got wasn't the version of the dad that my brothers who lived in the household with him got. They got the present dad. They got the dad that they call Uncle Snowball, who would go on family vacations and play football and throw the ball with them, right? They got two different versions of a father. And that's also the case when it comes to shame, guilt, and embarrassment, our trauma. How does it interfere with how we show up? And we can show up in different ways, you know? So
And how did you come to learn about, the siblings from your father's side, what they got? Are you in touch with them?
I'm not. My existence is too hard for them to bear.
Mm.
Given how much they care about their mother. And I understand against trauma and the circumstances that really create this rift between our relationships. But you know, the funny story is that my wife, who Samantha girlfriend at the time, helped me find my siblings. And I lied to all of them. I invited them to the Applebee's and where we all met for the first time. And, you know, we were doing karaoke and spending time with one another. And while there, my siblings would tell me about how great my father was. And it was a disconnect because it was hard for me to reconcile the version of their dad that I had and the version of dad that they had. And we're talking to one of my siblings who's 2 years older than me, right? Who I just found out about when my wife found him on my behalf. So it was a very hard discussion. And we haven't talked in almost 8 years since, well, probably, wow, I'm almost 40. So we found them like in my mid 20s. So it was more than 8 years, actually. I haven't talked to them since we all met at Applebee's and had that conversation. But that's when I learned that dad was a great dad to the kids that was in his marriage, not to the kids that he had outside relationships with. And there were two other siblings that he had from another relationship outside of his marriage. We
Mm,
had more of a connection because they had the same version of dad that I had,
mm,
and we could connect on that level a little bit deeper. But we don't
yeah.
talk. Yeah.
Yeah. What did your mom tell you? Did you ask your mom why do I see my dad 3 times a year? What was the story she was telling?
I think one thing that moms do very well is that they try to protect their children the best way that they can. So, mom didn't lie, but she also avoided answering the question,
Mm,
right? I think it was a very important task that she had to ensure that I did not take on blame of a situation that had nothing to do with me, but also keep my father in a good light from what she can control. Like my mother would sign his name on my Christmas cards. She would always buy a present from him and put her name on it
mm,
and put it under the Christmas tree. So she really wanted to protect any type of relationship that we could potentially have due to the circumstance. So she never badmouthed him and none of that. So when I told her about my father and I took a picture of his house because I drove by the house, my cousin took me by the house and I saw where he lived and raised my siblings. And I took a picture and I took it back to her. And I remember her looking at the picture and she was so shocked. She was like, "Oh my gosh." She said, "I did not know." And then she went quiet. My mother's very stoic and she rarely shows any emotion or shock. But that was the first time I seen my mother be shocked, but also silent at the same time because she was very savvy with how she answers the questions. She could not reconcile me showing the picture and what I was telling her and the man that she knew for a good portion of her life, who she believed she loved. So it was hard for her.
oh, wow.
Yeah.
Uh, do you have a relationship with your dad today?
No,
You so after when you were a kid, you never had any relationship?
we had the relationship where when I was a kid, between the ages of 6 and 10, I knew dad would come in his pickup truck and we would play and we would spend time. That was the extent of our relationship. And what it was or what it could be, I don't know. But then when he left,
Mm,
there was no relationship, there were no visits, there were no playing, no
mm.
conversation.
That
Um,
must have been hard for you, like as a kid, to interpret that, right? And be with that pain.
Absolutely, it's very hard, and to be honest with you, my mother and my father still maintain a relationship, and
Still now to this day?
yeah, they genuinely,
Wow.
it's a very,
Wow.
it's a very complex situation. My mother genuinely loves my father, and I
Yeah.
would say that my father loves my mother. But that's a love without my involvement, right? I don't judge it, nor do I understand it. Nonetheless, it's definitely a part of my life that has been very complex to understand. But I do understand that love is very complicated, just like pain is very complicated. I know the pain that I felt from that relationship and sometimes wishing that I can be a part of that relationship. Nonetheless, I understand that there's something that my father does for my mother that makes her feel very important and feel connected. There's something that she does for him that makes him feel connected that is out of my awareness. But who am I to judge, you know?
Wow, that's very mature of you.
Yeah.
But how about his wife? Does she know about your mom?
So me and my wife Samantha have
No, not
different.
not your wife, his wife.
His wife
Yeah.
does she know about my mom?
Yeah.
So my wife and I have different hypotheses
Mm,
about the situation. She would say that my father's wife knows about me and she's just not saying anything.
mm,
Say that my father's wife doesn't know anything about me. Because I do believe my father was very strategic about how he has a saying, my business is my business. So he's very strategic about how he kept his business away from certain people. And rarely did people inquire about his business if he told them it was none of their business. They respected him in that way. So we know we have two different hypotheses. She thinks she does. I think she doesn't. But hey, I think we all could draw our own conclusions.
well, you have the book, you carry his name, right? Now your book is out and your story is out.
Yes. She will know now if she don't know.
Yeah. Wow, that's pretty interesting. From your book, one story really moved me. It's when you were 10 years old and you were being baptized. Can you tell that story? That was very moving.
Yes, yes. And to be honest with you, it's the story. that always brought me back from a dark place when I felt like I didn't have any worth. And the story I always tell myself, when things go wrong, Charles, remember this day. And the day was very special. It was a hot summer day, and I was on the verge of being baptized, and I was in the lobby of the church where I was raised, a Midway Missionary Baptist Church in College Park, Georgia, with the other kids, and we were on the verge of being escorted to the front of the church. The deacons had ushered us to come to the front of the church, led by the other professionals in the church. And I remember walking down the aisle and seeing all of the parents, the family members of the other children that were being baptized with me that day. Then we got to the front of the church, and I was the last person to be called to the front by the pastor. And Pastor Lumpkin, Edward Lumpkin, I will never forget this. He said, Charles, come here, it's your turn. And he put his arm around my shoulder, said, you okay, son? And turned us both towards the crowd. Church was packed, and I was nervous. My mother was in the audience by herself. And during the baptism in our church, the pastor always asked the congregants, will the family of the child please stand? That's a part of the tradition. So Pastor Lumpkin did what he did. He followed that tradition. He said, hey, will the family of this young man please stand? And only my mother stood up by herself, and you could hear a pin drop. That's how silent it was. You could hear the pin drop, and you could hear the organ playing in the background. And then the pastor looked at me with like this tear in his eyes. You could see his eyes are very red because he was like, I hear this young man, I see his mother. There's a conflict here, and as a pastor of this church, I need to reconcile that issue. I need to say something. So he got mad. He said, "Will the family of this young man please stand?" Say, hey, you all better stand. And when he said that, everyone stood at the same time, and they stood there with me. And for me, I think that moment was more than them just standing. All of them, every member of that church, made a conscious effort to be there for me and stand in the gap for my father in his struggles, and they did that. And so I am a great father today because of those people in the church that stood for me, the deacons, the mothers in the church that helped my mom and helped me and supported me with love and care and worth. So I always had that memory etched in my heart. And I think that's the greatest gift that my mom could give me, which is that church, and the greatest gift that those congregants, those bunch of strangers could give me was standing for me and keeping their word that they would support me along my way. So that's what happened. It was a great experience. It saved my life many times, to be honest with you, Anna.
Wow. I mean, it shows the power of the community and other people mentoring and being there for you and being a father figure, mother figure, parent, figure for you. Were there other mentors and coaches? You're right about that. What can you say about other father figures who shaped you and influenced you, your thinking, who you became?
Yeah, my cousin Ant, I dedicated the book to him. He was one of the people. He taught me how to cook, and he was the other parent in the household who helped raise me. He was her son, my auntie Diane, the other person I dedicated the book to. Her mother would be in her and my mother were sisters, and they helped raise me together. And Ant was like that male figure. He would show me how to cook. I'm a great cook today because of Ant. He would also talk to me and lead me along my way. So he's one of my fathers. He really is. I love him to death. Also, Dr. Owens, who supported me in getting through college and showed me that it was powerful, that I had the power to not allow my past to define my future. And there's so many, the pastor in the church who taught me how to speak and taught me how to preach. And, as a pastor today, I'm a pastor because of men like them, who say, hey, you know what, you can do this, Charles. So, yeah, so many men. I call them my supplemental fathers. They were there for my father, and they were actually my fathers. Larry, so many people I can name today. We'll be here all day, and if I tell you about all the men that helped me become the man I am today.
So tell me about your experience of first becoming a father and how has the fatherhood journey been for you? What wounds activated in you and how have you grown and healed through this journey of parenthood?
Yeah, the initial journey of my son was very hard. I did not want to duplicate the version of the father my father was to me with my son. So, in doing so, I think I really caused a lot of issues during that first pregnancy with my wife to intentionally jeopardize what could be great because in fear that I would become like my father. That was one of the main things that scared me during the pregnancy journey, to be honest with you. And I was self-sabotaging. But eventually I learned through that process that I can get through it. And so I got to counseling and really started to talk about my own stuff. And a lot of stuff that I dealt with was stuff that my family members and my supplemental fathers could not help me with because it was pertaining to my actual biological father. I needed the professional support. So I was able to get that to really deal with that internal stuff to help me get through that first pregnancy. And thank God I did because my son is one of the most amazing, humble spirited people who genuinely loves me for me. He don't care about what I do. He just loves his daddy. And, and one day he said something to me, and I think I mentioned it in the book. I'm not sure if I did, but he said, Daddy, I love you because you made me the greatest peanut butter and jelly sandwich. And then I realized, Charles, everything you were stressing about, your son don't care nothing about you buying a house all the time. He only cares about you being present and making peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. And I'm like, hey, I can do that. I can make a good peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. So the first pregnancy was very challenging. And then my son taught me a lot about fatherhood. And then we ended up having Samaya, my daughter, who's now 4. And that pregnancy was very smooth. I think for me, it's because I knew I could do it, but also I knew that I didn't have to get it right all the time to be great at it. And my son taught me that. And I think it allowed me to have more compassion for myself that second pregnancy, which helped my wife, but also helped me be a better father in the long run. So that's the journey for me. And the story here is that I think and I have to attribute the moment where my mom brought up my baby book and showed me a picture of my father holding me for the first time for my son's pregnancy. That was very helpful too, because it further solidified while we were in the birthing room, my wife was getting ready to have my child. It solidified the fact that it wasn't my fault that dad was absent. It was actually issues that were way beyond me.
Wow, that's pretty powerful.
Yeah, that helped me a lot with the second pregnancy for sure.
Yeah, in the book, you write pain is heavy and emotional experience we all carry. Its origin may differ from person to person, but we all feel the effects no matter how pain enters our lives. Tracking your pain influences our emotions is a helpful way to process trauma. And you talk about a lot about the inner child and your work, with men involves, and which is really rare, right? We talk about it's women mostly do inner work these days. They are interested in personal development, right? That this is like, but I really love that you do this work with men. You're right. To put it another way, it's important for a father to parent his inner child. So I want to ask you why it's important and then how can fathers do that because you have a whole protocol and a process. I love that.
Yeah, it's important. Working with men for years, I found that dealing with emotions is extremely difficult. And the best way to deal with emotions for me is to externalize the emotion. I think the first thing is that I genuinely believe that we have an inner child, but I believe that in order for men to connect with themselves and process difficult emotions, they have to externalize what they deem as a problem. So when I think about the inner child, I believe it, but in order for men to be able to believe it and deal with it, they have to see it. And the only way that I can envision and seeing it is to take them through the journey of how I dealt with my own emotional scars. And I thought about CJ, who I was when I was a child and what he needed and the things that hurt him. And then I realized that the things that CJ needed were the things that I still need today. And I'm like, wow, I'm older, I'm in my 30s. What I wanted as a child is still true today. So there's something there that I have to reconcile. So we created this notion of inner child and assessment to assess what that is and have conversations with it to help men have context to process things that can be very difficult to process without externalizing them. So that's how we came to that conclusion.
So what needs were your unmet needs from childhood?
Yeah. So for me, in full transparency, I needed to feel like I was a part of a community. I'm for years trying to find importance and trying to find family, even in the midst of having one. For me, my inner child felt neglected by his father. So although I had my family present, I could not fully appreciate their value because I was searching for what I didn't have. So it took me years to understand that I'm still valuable despite what I didn't have. But that's just my inner child crying when he feels like he's not a part of community. You have community, Charles. You see the conflict, inner child said one thing, my trauma saying one thing, but what I have is completely different than what I have. I have family, I have my wife, I have my children, I have my mother, I have my aunts, I have community. To be honest with you, that was the title of my conflict is feeling valued, feeling a part of. If my inner child had a book, he would name it feeling a part of. That's the nature of my struggle is feeling a part of having community.
And maybe that's why you even built one, right? For fathers. Like that's your mission. That's great. The inner child is its essence a lover. I love that sentence. So, what's the process that you take men through to find connection to their inner child, to do this healing work? Specifically, there are some questions that you ask. I want you to talk about those 4 questions.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Those questions for us came about really recognizing what they didn't have, what they want, and their vision of the father they want to be. So all of my work in terms of questions of assessing the inner child, try to have a relationship with the inner child, could be summed up with those 3 themes I just listed. So any question that I mentioned is connected to those themes: what you lack, what you want, and what you have, and what does it look like in order for you to create this vision and version of yourself that you didn't have. I haven't been able to get there with many of the men that I serve if we didn't look at what they didn't have. So what they didn't have is typically a bridge to have them create what they didn't have with their children. So that's how we look at it. And those are the questions. That's the process. So assessment for me initially starts off with your behavior. What behaviors are you exuding? Secondly, what is it that, what's the nature of the relationship that you had with the person in your life, your father or a father figure that may have contributed to what you feel or what you're currently experiencing? Third, what are the characteristics of the person you want to be in your children's lives? And four, what are the things that are preventing you from getting there? And typically, what we see that's connected to the things that you didn't have and your inability to actually articulate what you didn't have. When I ask men what you didn't have and what your experiences were, they always get stuck at that, right? They get stuck at, it's easy to blame and to assess, who was wrong to you, but it's hard to assess how those things still affect you today, even though there's 20 or 30 years later. That's the disconnect for a lot of men and their emotions, which we have to spend a lot of time with.
Yeah, I think, yeah, identifying our needs is hard for all of us. I could imagine specifically for men, right? The way they are cultured, not to talk about feelings and needs. It could be a lot harder. So, what kind of experiences or exercises do you take someone who, let's say, has a hard time identifying their needs, even today, right?
Yeah. So for me, this is how I look at ministry. I look at preaching. I'm not a pastor that throws scriptures onto people, right? I don't believe that the scripture alone is going to heal you. I'm an action-oriented pastor. And for me, I believe that much of preaching and sermon is in your actions, right? So if I'm preaching the gospel, my ultimate goal as a pastor is to preach through my actions, not through my words. That's the approach that I take in the work that I do with men. So a lot of the intervention is our actions, right? So I tell the men that I love them. It's one simple action. A lot of them may not have heard it, and it could be very uncomfortable for men to express that they love someone, right? So I hug them, right? It can be hard for a man to show a hug to another man. So showing affection, stating the affection. I wish them happy birthday. I let them know that I value them and that it's very important that I see them again, right? I also make sure that my office space is speaking the same language of love and appreciation for them than what I'm speaking. I can't be the only one speaking that I love them, and my environment does not show the same, or the people that I hire doesn't display the same. So much of the ministry, Anna, is definitely through actions, right? When they say, "Hey, I'm a bad person and I'm ugly and I'm worthless," right? I always counter it with love. You're very important, right? You're deserving of love. You can be in your kid's life, even though it's very hard for you to realize it right now. And to be honest with you, why is that my ministry? Is because many of the things that I received that have been compelling for me to be the man that I am today were less talk and more action, right? Like my Aunt Gloria Jean would see me every time and she knew what I was experiencing. And every time she see me, she would hug me and hold me for like 2 minutes and say, "I love you." She just start validating and speaking positivity into my ear. So when I'm hugging people and hugging men, I'm thinking about her. When I'm validating men, I'm thinking about her, right? When they say negative things about themselves, right? I'm thinking about Dr. Owens, who told me, Charles, don't let your past determine your future, right? So being able to convey those things, counter the negativity, but also show that I love and care through small acts of kindness is the intervention in itself. And it's very simple. And I tell people that all the time, Charles, you can't tell me that, that's the only thing that you do that's been working. But it really is. I think if we do more of the acknowledging the small things and more of displaying our love than talking, I think we would be in a better place in the world in general, So
There's a part in the book where you talk about this, your work with this father, Zephaniah, right? And you talk about how you helped this person. And there's like a kind of a step-by-step process, right? Understanding emotions, modeling empathy, tending to the child through the dad, creating a safe space. I'm wondering if you can talk about this process.
that's definitely a part of the assessment tool, which by assessing is very important for us. The things that I mentioned earlier are action to treat the inner child and our ongoing engagement with them. But much of the work with all of the dads starts with the assessment piece, and that is externalizing the harm from the person themselves. So, externalization is a narrative therapy technique that says, you know what, in order to address an issue, you have to separate it from the person. So, you take addiction. Typically, there's some practices that say, hey, in order to be effective, like 12-step practice, you have to say that you're an addict, right? That's not my disposition. That's not necessarily how I approach the work. It's more so externalization. How do I take that anger, that depression, the thing that hurt me the most? How do I externalize it from me? How do I name it? And then how do I talk to it and have a relationship with it without it being so much about me being the issue? That's the process that we take them through as a part of the assessment process. And a lot of the work that happened with Zephaniah occurred starting at that point. All the other things, once you have it externalized, for me, you can have a relationship with the inner child, right? So some people don't like who they were as children. Many men may not like who they were as children. Perhaps they were too soft. Perhaps they cried too much. Perhaps, everything that goes against that falls into this masculine stereotype is typically what many men may dislike that struggle with re-engagement or being a father that's nurturing, right? So we get that on paper, we name it, and then we start with treating that child a little bit different. Well, a lot more different than how they were treated when they were younger. Because again, my assumption is just because you're older, the child doesn't leave you. The child is with you still. How can I give this father the things that that child needed that he didn't get now? And that's the majority of the work when we're doing it at Fathers UpLift, even that I do it myself on a day-to-day basis.
Hmm. So what emotions are, men are known to mask their vulnerability and just show anger. What can you say about their emotional healing? Or what emotions were difficult for you? Like what came out of, from doing this work with men or when you did your own healing? What did you have to face? What was hard for you?
Yeah. Vulnerability for me is anger. Anger is a mask for me. So when I'm angry, I can mask it. I don't talk about it. Anything that kind of cuts off the world and allows people to assume what I'm feeling as opposed to giving them what I'm actually feeling, that's a mask for me. So anger, perfection, I definitely like to mask it with happiness. A lot of men use happiness to mask pain. You probably, a lot of men like to joke often, but they joke not to cry, right? These are very popular masks among men, right? It's important to call out that is mask, right? That is a mask. And I think it's important for the man and through this assessment too and the work that we do. And what I'm encouraging people in this book is to really acknowledge the mask, to be able to confront the issue behind the mask. And I think when we focus on the inner child and acknowledge that we have one, that's definitely a way of doing that, right? And doing that on a consistent basis.
What advice would you give to your younger self, the one who wasn't the father yet, but you were about to become, like knowing what you know now about fatherhood, the work that you have done, with your first pregnancy, your fears and things like that. If you were to go back and whisper something in his ear, what would you say?
Hmm. That's a great question. I would say none of us are the worst of ourselves all the time. I would say that, you know, um, and we don't have to be perfect to be good. I would also say that too. And the reason why I say that, much of my struggles has been geared towards being able to be a part of a community, but also feel like I was good enough to be a part of a community, right? And because I thought I was the worst of anything, right? I was unworthy. I didn't want people that want me to be around, but generally, the world is good. There are a lot of good people in the world, and sometimes, oftentimes, your pain can mask that truth, but that's the ultimate truth. There's more good than bad, and it's hard to get out of the bad when you've been hurt so many times.
Yeah. Like, what do you think about raising your children without your father, without their grandfather? Like, how do you fill that space, or what do you notice as you parent your children? He's also absent, right? He was an absent father and he's an absent grandfather. So talk to me about this if you have feelings or any, fears that anything around this.
My wife's father has become a pseudo father to me, and he's an amazing grandfather. So my children have three amazing grandmothers and one amazing grandfather, and a whole bunch of amazing fathers that fathered me in their village. So they have a lot of people that love them. And at this point, I focus on the people that love them and love us. My father may be ready in this lifetime, or he may never be ready. But my kids, their main focus and our focus is who loves us and who wants us to be around, which is different than how I was raised. I focused on the deficit so many times, and I didn't focus enough on the love that people had for me. So at this part of my life, it's more about those that love us and how do we be present for them the same way they show up for us.
That's such a great perspective. I agree. So, what was your father's trauma? What was his story that led him to make the choices that he made? What do you know about it?
I do know that my father was the son of a bishop in the town where he lived. My grandfather, L.B. Daniels, has a big church in Valdosta, Georgia, where he named it after his wife, which is Grace Victory Church.
Mm.
So PKs, we call them pastor kids. There's a lot of pressure on them to perform and to be perfect and to be examples in society. So I can only imagine how much pressure that may have been for my own father to bring children around outside of his marriage when his father is a well-known bishop in the church. So religion plays a role, how people view leaders of faith and their children in these institutions played a role. The children feeling the pressure of their pastor's leadership and who they are, who their fathers are in the community, feeling as if they have to lead that same life that they live and be just them and be like them. It's a lot of pressure. I can only imagine that's a lot of pressure for my father to be a part of the family that he was a part of and to parent a child outside of his marriage when my grandfather had been married for over 30 years and was well respectable in the town where he lived. So I can imagine when we look at barriers outside of mental health challenges and marital and relationship challenges, there was definitely societal challenges and struggles that he had living up to the expectations of his own father, Bishop L.B. Daniels, and the family and the congregants who followed Bishop L.B. Daniels, right? So, as his inner child, I know he grappled with that for sure.
Wow. Is there anything that you always wanted to ask your dad, or now even, or writing this book? What is one thing that you always wanted to ask him or know? Have you ever written letters to him? I'm curious about that.
Well, the letters I've written to him were in my pain and was cursing him out, calling him names.
That's important too.
And those letters didn't make it to USPS. Nonetheless, it was good healing. It was good healing to say what I really wanted to say, right, without causing any more harm. I think one of the main questions that I had for my father that I had a chance, that my mom had a chance of conveying to him was pretty much a very important question because my mother's father died before I was born. I didn't have a chance to meet him. But my father's father was alive and died when I was 16. I had a chance to meet him. So one of the questions I had asked him, I had my mom ask him was, could I meet my grandfather? And
Bishop Guy?
yeah, the bishop guy, and
Yeah.
he would always say, you'll meet him tell that boy he'll meet my father when the time is right.
Mhm.
And the time never came. My grandfather died when I was 16, and I remember my father conveyed to my mother that she should bring me to the funeral to meet my grandfather. But I was playing with my cousins on my summer break in West Palm Beach, Florida, where my mother's family is from. And I said, there's no way that I'm leaving fun times and lily dillies and ice cream trucks and barbecue with my cousins to go to a funeral. That's not the type of summer that I envisioned. But also, I didn't know my grandfather, right? There's moments where I kind of wish I would have went just to, meet other members of the family. But, I'm happy that he knew how much I wanted to meet my grandfather. So that didn't happen. But hey, that's one thing that he does know, that that was definitely something that I always wanted, but I didn't have. And today, I don't really have any questions for my father. I think I would say that he knows that he has an opportunity to be a part of his grandchildren's life and my life if he wants it. But that's not something that we're going to wait around for or force him to do. He has to be ready for that. And we are open to that. Our healing journey is more mature. We're very much open to that.
What can you say about for men of color, right? This is not unusual in the Black community, right? To grow up without fathers. From your work, like who are the fathers that you serve and what have you learned about this topic?
Fathers of color. There's the individuals that don't necessarily like my work or agree with my work assume that I feed into the Black father absenteeism trope. There's notions, father absenteeism does exist in the Black community, but people weaponize it. They
Mm.
weaponize it against fathers of color. And that has never been my MO or my mission, but I do want to definitely acknowledge that and validate that there is a trope and people do weaponize it. For me, I've always been about informing people that, there's a lot of Black and brown fathers involved in their kids' lives. But for us to suggest that there aren't Black and fathers that are absent is for us to ignore the issues that racism, oppression contribute to father
Mhm.
absenteeism in Black and brown communities. Who's mass deportation affecting mainly today? It's mainly affecting Black and brown people. Who is mass incarceration? What are the mass incarceration rates? Who is that affecting? Mainly Black and brown people, right? So I was telling people all the time, both narratives coexist, but it's important for them to not ignore one narrative to uplift another, because when you do that, you end up ignoring the issues that really make it difficult for Black and brown fathers to show up. And typically, when I'm meeting with them, they're talking about the issues that make it difficult for them to show up. They're crying on my shoulder. A lot of these stories that people don't have an opportunity to see that I tried to tell in this book. Because when you get caught up in the narrative, what sounds good and what makes us look good, we ignore some of the stuff that really prevents other men that want to be present to be present, right? And I think that's very important for us to keep in mind. And I think that's something that I try to inform people about when we talk about what are the Black and brown experience, what are those men experiencing. They want to be engaged in their kids' lives, but there's a lot of systems that's preventing them from doing that, like ones that we see today. And that's the reality of their story and their situations.
Yeah. What do you hope people will take away from your book? Like the main message, the lesson or the message?
I want, people outside of fathers themselves to understand that fathers care despite their position in society, and I want them to understand how complex and difficult it is for fathers to be present. It's not as easy as we assume. And for fathers themselves, my ultimate goal of this book is to let them know there's always hope, even when you think there isn't hope, and that healing is possible for you too, if you are stuck in the realm of hopelessness. That's the takeaway for me, to be honest with you.
Wow. Thank you so much, Charles. I really appreciate you connecting with me. I enjoyed reading the book and I love your message and the work that you do. It's very inspiring. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it, Anna.
That concludes today's conversation, my dear listener, and I hope you found this episode helpful and inspiring. Be sure to hit that follow button so you don't miss future episodes, and take a moment to leave a rating and review. It really helps others find the show. I would love to hear your thoughts and takeaways. Join the conversation in the Authentic Parenting Facebook group or visit the contact page at authenticparenting.com/contact to get in touch. Authentic Parenting is an ad-free show, and your donations is what makes this podcast possible. Support the show by visiting authenticparenting.com/support or becoming a patron at patreon.com. Your contributions make it possible for me to continue bringing you weekly episodes. And as always, connect to the present moment, to yourself and your children. Until next week, I am Anna Seawold. Thank you so much for listening.